This conference will now be recorded. This conference will now be recorded.
I'm going to mute everyone for now, and I'll explain our housekeeping in a few minutes, but this will just avoid disturbances. Okay, very good evening, everyone, except for anyone joining us from the Americas, and I know Iris is there, so good morning to you. Thank you, everyone, for joining our live webinar today. I'm Rajiv Burman, your host today and a co-founder of Growth Source, along with Vikas Malhotra. This webinar will be for 90 minutes and will be interactive, even more than our previous webinars. Please feel free to type in your questions in the chat box as we go along. Vikas will consolidate these and raise them with Dawn through the session at appropriate times. Please keep yourself on mute. You can keep your videos on if you like. It'll make for a much more interactive and fun environment. It'll also keep Dawn, who is our presenter today, awake. Dawn is an American based in Australia, and I think given the time zone, it's pretty late for him. So really appreciate Dawn taking the time to do this. Don Hummons is a behavioral psychologist and a coach to leaders in many Fortune 500 companies. He's joined, along with Don, we have Iris Hainstock. Iris is an international success coach with special interest in neuroscience, brain-based coaching, strengths-based coaching, and heart-based transformational coaching. She's based in Vancouver, Canada. And I think she'll be the one who is brightest, given her day is just starting. We'll post the recording of this webinar on our site, and you'll receive the link tomorrow. You will also receive a feedback questionnaire, and like in our previous feedbacks, we really appreciate the inputs we get and make changes for our future webinars. So once again, thank you for joining us. And before I hand over to Dawn, once again, a reminder, keep your videos on if you like. Keep your microphones on mute. Type in your questions in the chat box, and we'll all have a great session. With that, Dawn, over to you.
Well, thank you, Rajiv, and good evening to all of you, and good morning to Iris. Today, we're actually going to start with a coaching session, and we thought we'd mix things up. Iris also has a prior engagement, so we want to honor that. So I'm actually going to turn this over to Iris and Vikas so that all of you can see what a brain-based coaching session looks like. This will be formed around conversations and negative thoughts and pessimistic thoughts, things that many of us have to deal with every single day. Those of you who are in positions of leadership, you probably have to deal with some of that within your teams. Just want you to see what a brain-based coaching scenario looks like. It's a little different than our traditional coaching styles, but as you see Iris masterfully go through it, you will begin to understand and say, oh, okay, this is how this works, and she'll tie in the neuroscience pieces. And so with that, I'm going to mute myself and take myself off camera and turn it over to Iris. Iris?
Helps if I take the mute off, doesn't it? So good day, everyone. Today I'm coaching Rajiv, and we've had a previous discovery session, though this is not rehearsed at all, so I have no idea what Rajiv is going to say. But the scenario is that Rajiv, it's come to Rajiv's attention that he's been quite negative, and he thinks that there's nothing very much positive happening in his life. Rajiv, do you mind, just for the audience sake, just sort of explaining the situation or the scenario before we dive in?
Sure. And again, just to reinforce, I think this is real, totally unscripted, and I actually only got to know a couple of hours ago that I would be the coachee. But I'm happy to be coached by the Iris. So the scenario that I thought of, that I'm currently grappling with, is I think everyone on this webinar and otherwise are dealing with the entire issue of being logged in and so on. And all my career, I've worked, very closely with people in large teams and groups and so on. And although a lot of our work is continuing and we do web, calls and video conferences, etc., it is just not the same. And that entire thing of being isolated for these, almost now 50 days and so on, really gets to me. And sometimes when the news is not good or something takes longer, either on the operation side or with a client or something, I find it more difficult to bounce out of it than I used to in the past. So kind of becoming more negative about the situation is so much more easier right now, and I find it more and more difficult to kind of pull myself out of it. When things are going well, of course, it's all okay. It's just when they don't go well, and it does happen, that in this last 50 days I've struggled to deal with that. So I was looking for help. Iris, is how do I stay resilient in this current situation?
Right. So that's a really good question. How to stay resilient. And with brain-based coaching, what's a little bit different is there's some instruction that comes along with this, so I can help you understand what it is that your brain is doing, so that you can then consciously make plans to change habits or behaviors, conversations, and those types of things. So if you can just think back to a time when things were going better and your resiliency was high. So maybe just close your eyes, take a few deep breaths, let the rest of the day kind of fall away, and think about, that ideal time that you had in the office or a really great conversation. And take a couple of minutes to bring that back to memory and dig it out of your unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us a little bit about that situation and kind of set it up for us, and tell us how that went, what it feels like.
Well, what it felt like was a lot of high energy, great enthusiasm about whatever we are doing. And I'm thinking back on a year and a half ago when Vikas and I kind of started this journey. There were times when we really had some, there were many times when we had some great what we thought were brainwaves and ideas about how to structure and what we wanted to do. And we would build upon each other. And there was this lot of energy. We would run out of time to talk about those, and we used to feel that the day was ending too soon. And there was so much that we wanted to do in those times. So I would say, yeah, those are, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's the kind of feeling we had. Lots of energy, lots of positive building on each other's ideas, and a lot of enthusiasm for doing the next thing.
Right. And the situation then, when you were building those ideas and starting your business, did you know how it was going to turn out, or was there uncertainty?
Oh, lots of uncertainty.
So,
lots of uncertainty.
Right. So is that uncertainty different now than then, or is it similar?
Yeah, I think the uncertainty or the issues are similar, but yeah, so that, yeah, let me just stop here to answer your question. Yes, it is. The uncertainty is similar.
Okay. So, so then thinking of how you felt about that and thinking about how you want to have more resilience, can you capture some of what you experienced then and bring it forward to now? And if so, what would you bring forward? And I'll explain why I'm asking that question in a minute.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, are there things that I could bring? Yeah, I mean, I think so when we are faced with challenges, we still spend a fair amount of time discussing those and talking about how to deal with them and building on it. I think what we are missing, the missing parts are, and that's one that I don't know how to deal with, are that physical presence that we had. That body language would give out very strong positive vibes about what we felt and so on. That chemistry or dynamic is missing, or is at least not there to that extent. So, definitely, I know we do have great conversations and have lots of enthusiasm in that time, but sustaining it in absence of that physical proximity is a little bit of a challenge.
Right. So there's actually a learning curve here that you're on. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's a learning curve to understand now how to operate, navigate, how to connect, how to get that energy, how to create that energy. And when we look at the design, let's start with the designed change concept, which is the steps that we'll walk through for our coaching, and we'll actually go beyond this one session. So in the designed change concept, you look at where you are now and what your desired state is, which is very similar to the coach training we got and things that we did to achieve our ICF credentials. So if you think about where you are now, tell me a little bit more about, because you already told me quite a bit more, or some about what you want to achieve. You want to have that energy, but tell me a little bit more about what you want to achieve, given that it's going to be a new normal now. So that's still unknown.
Yeah. You're right. I mean, it definitely is a learning curve. And I think what I want to achieve is, how do I replicate that same feeling of being, looking at things much more positively, despite these barriers of, being in a lockdown and not being able to go and meet up with people and so on. So how, yeah, so that's what I want to achieve. How do I still create that feeling inside me
Right.
that things are going to work out and we will have, great success and solutions,
Right.
even though I may not be surrounded with people, and so on. So does it make sense?
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And what I also heard in what you said, even though you didn't say the word, was belief was coming up. So it's to believe that you can replicate this, that it's being those feelings, that engagement, that connection, even though you can't replicate the physicality of it.
Mhm.
So it starts with belief. And when we talk about, and of course now I'm on step 3 in the design change concept, which is this learning process. But when we also think about how our beliefs and our habits are created, and if I can just go through how the brain creates a sense of self, so that you can understand that a little bit better. So I hope I'm not confusing you by explaining the design change concept and then switching over to how your brain creates a concept of self. So from a very, very early age, your childhood years, you take in information, and your child's brain starts to make sense of that information, and you have emotion attached to that information. And then you put some language to it, even as a child. And that cyclical, using filters of your perceptions, any kind of biases as a child, those all grow from all of the experiences that you take in. And we go through school and making friends and going to more education, going to a job, all of the interactions that we have. And so this cycle keeps going where you take in the information, you add emotion to it, you use your filters, you put your own language to it, and this creates your sense of self. And that's why everybody has such a different sense of self and this different outlook on life. So when you think of all of your life leading up to this pandemic, you were using all of those experiences and you were making sense of your life, your situation, your engagement. Now a big curveball has been thrown at you, and all of those things that you thought would work are no longer working, or only some of them are working. And when you try to relate back to some of the ways we did things previously, they don't make sense and they create that uncertainty. Is that making sense so far?
Mm-hmm.
So if you now think about what you said, so you've said, okay, well, I'm missing that personal contact. I'm missing those vibes that I get when I sit across the table from someone. And you have a new reality now, and your brain is trying to make sense of it. So how can you help your brain learn something new? Because your brain always wants to go back to the old. It wants to stay in the comfortable. It wants to protect you. And it wants to put all that information into your unconscious or subconscious so that it has lots of space to protect you. So now you have to think a little bit more, because we usually, our conscious is about 5% of what we do, and our subconscious or unconscious is 95%. So now we have to set intentions and we have to think about our beliefs. Does that sound making sense so far?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So in this new reality, and you want to create this, or sorry, replicate what you had before, what are some ways that you can engage more with Vikas or anyone else that you are working with so that you can build up a familiarity with how you connect with them, even though it's going to be different. So you're creating your new norm.
Well, some of the things that we have begun to try are spending more time, almost on a regular periodic basis, daily having a conversation at the end of the day about things that we need to get done, or just kind of venting out and so on. So that helps. Obviously, we have to be more diligent about it, but I think I noticed the days we skip doing it, there is a fallback on the negativity. But the more frequently we do it, that negative feeling doesn't arise. So that, I think, is definitely helpful. And kind of just talking more and just going over and just venting. A lot of our conversations, I think, at the beginning of the lockdown were around some specific tactical issues, rather than sometimes you just have to, I think, vent. I think that's definitely been very helpful. So I would say that's one. What else? Again, we would spend a lot of time doing phone conversations, and I think the video chats help a lot, because then you can you at least have visual cues around this, right? So that again has been very helpful.
Okay.
I don't know if I can think of anything else right now.
So that you said quite a bit there, actually. So because you were looking for positive vibes that are missing, and that positivity, what I heard from you, and you said the word several times, was venting. Is venting a positive thing for you?
Well, I think it leads, in itself, it may not be, but I think it helps me not dwell upon it too much, because once I have vented, then I don't let it bother me after that. So yeah, I mean, I think the consequence of venting is positive.
So if I can help you with that a little bit, yes, venting does release that angst or that uncertainty or that fear. Actually, the word is fear. However, when you're venting, you're actually, those are negative emotions when you're venting. And when you're venting to others around you and they're listening, unless they're very skilled, they're also bringing up negative energy. So actually, you're perpetuating negativity when you're venting. So I wouldn't say don't vent, because you're right, it does have some positive effect. However, we can actually become addicted to that negativity, because we get a dopamine drip or a dopamine shot when we've released that tension and we've put it out there and people agree with us and we feel better there. But if we continue to do that, then the reward that we're getting is always from the negativity rather than the positivity. And you want to actually create, recognize, and attract the positivity. Does that make sense?
You're right, it does.
So when you're having these calls, the other thing that I heard you saying was well, you know, we're working on projects, that there's tactical things, there's, you know, all of these things that you're working on. Where do you bring in the relationship conversation? So it's really important to think about your relationship with the people that you're talking with. So now you not only want to create and attract that positivity, but you also don't want to just keep it on task. You want to also bring in the relationship piece, which is what creates those vibes and creates that energy that you like. So it's not just about work. There needs to be some relationship things in there too. Even if you're just work, it's work relationships. It's not necessarily family or friends type of relationship, but it can still be positive and friendly. Does that ring true with you?
Mm-hmm. I think it's a good point. Yeah. Yeah. When you say that, you know, that realization is valuable. Yeah. I think a lot of the focus has been on work and to the exclusion of relationship.
Right. So even if you're having conference calls, how might they be different now that you have this awareness? How might you conduct those a little bit differently? What might you interject? Or
Yeah. I think we need to definitely spend some time um, working on the, you know, continuing to build on the relationship we have, and you know, I think you're valid about the venting part. It does lead to, yeah, you know, it can definitely, there's a lot of loading of negative emotions there. Need to watch out for that. Yeah.
okay. Well, I'm just going to sum up now, Rajiv. I mean, we can talk about this offline, and but just mindful of the time. So I want to sum up and for the audience that I started to introduce the design change concept to Rajiv, so he understood that there were steps to this coaching engagement. I needed to inform him, because brain-based coaching is new to him, about how the brain creates concept of self. I also wanted to introduce beliefs and have him think about his beliefs if he wants something new. And I also wanted to tap into his past positive experiences, and so that he could remember what and bring back from memory what those positive things were, how they physically impacted him, and how he can recreate that, and how he can help others that he engages with to also recreate that. And I hope that that I've been a little bit helpful, Rajiv. And we'll turn it back over to Dawn, and I think Dawn's going to facilitate a debrief for us.
Great, thank you. And Iris, it was, and it is useful. So
good.
Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. That was brilliant and very nice of that to have happened. I'm just going to do it a little differently than what we thought. The debrief will actually be at the end, along with Q&A, because I did want to make sure that we get the actual session in for this evening, and we will actually explore what took place in the debrief session, which would be the last 30 minutes. And it's something that we will also explore next our next session, because our next session will be 100% interactive, in that all of you are on the call today that will join for this last session. It's going to be all about you. So please be prepared to receive an email that will ask you to bring up real life situations, and we will have an expert panel that are very versed in brain-based coaching and development to answer all of your questions. So the last session will be a masterclass and will be very interactive. Having said that, let me jump right into tonight so that we don't run afoul. I know what people are still getting off of work and you might be a little tired, so just let me jump in and get started with this session. As you know, we've been talking about how to lead through turbulent times in that we have now a global pandemic. The previous sessions have been around how conversations and how those conversations are going to affect people, how team leaders can lead more effectively or effectively because their teams may be away from home. So there has been a lot of global communication around and with psychologists and psychiatrists and speech therapists and all these wonderful expert people about how do we shape our conversations now when we don't have that face-to-face contact anymore. And people are beginning to find out really something we've been taking for granted, which is looking at your workmate or your teammate is really powerful because you can see their facial expressions, you can understand their emotions, and more importantly, you can understand this wonderful word called intent. When you're looking at someone in the eye or in their face, you can actually determine their intent based upon their facial expressions, which is really powerful. So throughout this time period, there are things that we want people to be able to do. And so tonight's session is really about how to have better conversations during this pandemic. So as we begin to pour into it, one of the things that, and if I can get my, there we go, to work properly. So as the pandemic, it does truly invade all of our lives, and it's continuing to invade every aspect of everything that we're doing right now. So it's like everybody is just consumed with the coronavirus. And it's getting to a point where even I'm taking mental health calls because people are really, really, really stressed out. And because we're all consumed with this one thing. And life is still going on. So we really need to be in a situation where we can understand that these specific conversations are really becoming stale, repetitive, stressful, and they're actually causing a great deal of anxiety. I have spoken to several people today, this afternoon, who wants to take a break from everything. They just want to go someplace where they don't have to hear anything about the coronavirus. And while that is ideal because they're just bombarded with it every single day, I mean, they start their morning at 8 o'clock with a group meeting. There's 15 people on the call. In the first 10 to 15 minutes is all about the coronavirus and what it's doing to everyone else and what it's doing to their children and their kids, their dogs, and everybody else. Imagine when you start your day with negative information, you're feeding that into your system. Your brain is taking it on board. And oh, by the way, your brain will listen to negative information 3 times faster than it will listen to positive information. This is an evolutionary design because our ancestors had to pay attention to a rustling bush or sounds because it may have been another tribe that was coming to take their food, take their kids, kill their women, whatever the case may have been. So we're still in that vein where we have to listen to negative information. The problem with negative information is that it releases cortisol. And the more cortisol that is released after 15, 20 minutes of a conversation, then that means all of your preceding conversations after that are going to be laced with cortisol. And that's going to be a problem because if you're not aware of it, you're going to say something, your face will give away really what's going on, and that word intent that I use will also be a problem because people can see that you really don't care or that there is a real problem, but no one wants to say, hey, can I do something to help you? So it is up to us to be able to be in a position as leaders to be able to talk about something other than the coronavirus. So we need to stay informed. This is true. Our social calendars, as it says here, have all emptied out. People are getting bored with doing the Zoom calls, talking with people, and right now there's a phenomenon in the healthcare field. It's called doom Zoom, because people are just sick and tired of doing Zoom or Skype or whatever device people use to communicate with people all the time and see them every single morning. We're coming up in the healthcare industry that there are some things that we can do. So tonight I'm just going to explain about 4 or 5 of them that will help us to have more fruitful and meaningful conversations that will actually add health in life and creativity to every person we come in contact with. So that's what we want to do. So with number 1, let's learn how to connect with intent. I told you that by looking at people in the face, in the eyes, you can actually tell what the intent is. In this part of your face, we have what are called mirror neurons, and we then mimic what we see, or we can infer, or we can feel what that other person's intent happens to be simply just by looking in their face. So if a person is angry, we can really see that they're angry. If they're kind of hiding the anger, the mirror neurons, those are things that we can actually see with the naked eye, but we see them unconsciously. So we're not always able to hide our true feelings. When someone says something and it's not usually said with the normal happy-go-lucky thing that they've always taken a look at, then you get into another situation where you then are actually understanding what they're really meaning or what their real intent happens to be. So we want to be able to listen with intent. So conversations related to the global pandemic, it will release excess cortisol. That's just the long and short of it. It is going to do that. And then, I've actually got into a mode where I'm asking people how they're feeling, but even beyond that, I'm asking people, how are they thinking? What's going on inside your head? What type of thoughts are you having today? And that's just really with anyone. So like my neighbors, we connect on a daily basis. And it's great because I can walk outside and we all get out there at the same time in the morning, get some warm sun on us, and I can say hello and see how they're doing. I can look in their faces and tell if they've really had a bad night or if they're stressed out about today's events. So I'm able to actually talk about that just for a few moments. Say, hey, tell me what you're thinking about right now. And it's become kind of a joke over the past month and a half. So they see me say, okay, Don, let me tell you what I'm thinking about, just so you don't have to ask me. But it's actually kind of funny the way that it actually occurs. So asking people how they feel gives them or how they're actually thinking gives a sense of certainty, and that is going to help release more oxytocin. One, because you're looking at that person, you're going to bond with that person, and feelings of trust will actually come up, and you can then have more of an engagement with that individual at that point in time, which is what we're really all about. So listen with intent, connect with intent. Number 2 is to simply prepare conversational topics. If you know that you're going to have a meeting with your team and you want to take the first 2-3 minutes just to have a conversation to warm them up, to see how everyone's doing, just check in with everyone. So when you have that opportunity, prepare the conversation, lead it by asking curious and meaningful questions like, last night I was watching, I don't know, what's the cooking show? MasterChef. Or in North America, there's a great deal of repeat top performance, grand finals, football, American football, AFL, and you can ask questions leading with that and not so much start with, okay, so the day we got this, this, and this, and this, and this. When you do that, you actually that person doesn't have an opportunity to actually get in tune with the rest of the room. So we want to ask questions that lightens up the load just a little bit. It releases a fair amount of oxytocin. It decreases on the stress hormones that everyone is going to have, so that you can be free to actually begin to have the conversation that allows you to move to the next level. And in this case, it's getting on with the day's events or finding out where the team is or where the project sits at. This is really powerful just by asking better conversations or better questions. When I was a little boy, my father always told me, he said, son, if you ask better questions, you will get better answers. And so part of the preparing conversational topics, as the third bullet point there says, prepare topics completely unrelated to the coronavirus. If you're going to have just a time of gathering, whether it be 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, or 10 minutes, try talking about anything other than the coronavirus, because that is the major stress globally that we're all feeling. And so we want to be able to be a little different and do something about it. Number 3.
Don, can I request you to put this on the presentation mode?
If I put it on presentation mode, for some reason, it doesn't advance the slides. I'll give it a go.
Okay, sure.
Give it a go.
Okay, thank you.
I think if I stop for a moment, then it will actually not go, but we'll see what happens. Okay, so number 3, ask curious questions. You're welcome. Make sure you have follow-up questions to, did you see last night's grand final? Boy, was that guy good? Or baseball, whatever the case may be. So ask follow-up questions to that. Let the conversation continue to flow. So if someone starts to talk about, oh, it was great to do this, or it was great to see a cooking show, or whatever the case may have been, that everyone seems to be on the same page, let that conversation just sit out there. Let it continue to go until it dies down. And you will all know when it dies down. And the point of this is that as you're asking curious questions, the brain actually likes curious questions. And when you take away or you deflect from what everyone knows we're going to have to do in the next 10 or 15 minutes, which is we're going to talk about the project, or we're going to have to talk about discipline, or we're going to talk about development, or we're going to talk about, when we're all come back to work, or we're going to talk about a new plan, in the new era that we happen to find ourselves in. All of these things will flow much more naturally. People will become more creative. I'm always amazed when I hear about workshops on being creative. And the greatest thing that we can do to be creative, quite frankly, is to have fun. Don't start a meeting with, okay, so why we're here and we got to do this, because there's nothing creative about that. That actually is a turnoff to the brain. So you really want to get in there and have some fun. Let people laugh about things. We need to laugh right now. Too many people are way too serious. Walking through the store today, getting some lamb chops, people were looking in my direction and they were afraid to literally come within just passing each other. Now, logic kind of tells me, if you're sick, number one, we all know when another person is sick because we can actually see it and we can sense it. And if you look at another person's face, you can tell what's going on. But I see a lot of fear, and I see a lot of people just being way too serious. Most of the people we come in contact with have either had the coronavirus and didn't know it, and the other half won't. There's only really a small population of people that actually will or do currently have it. And there's a very even smaller population of people who unfortunately may lose their life to it. So can I just encourage you guys to have the conversation So it's fun, it's light, and you can keep it going. And when it's time to get into the details of business, it will happen automatically. Let's see if we can get this to, okay. So, and number 4, challenge yourself. If you as leaders challenge yourself, number 1, not to talk about the coronavirus for the first 5 minutes, talk about something else, as I've already said. Number 2, give your emotions a break from this crisis. Even us as leaders, we need the opportunity to decompress. As leaders, we have enough on our plate, and now this invisible taskmaster is sitting on top of us, and we are charged with the responsibility of leading other people. We need to give ourselves a break, because if those who are under our charge sees and senses that we're kind of okay, we're light, we are engaging, we're really connecting with one another, guess what? They will do it too. Because this is the time where leadership really has to come to the forefront by being positive. It's okay to be serious, but you need to be positive. And if you can smile, if you can say something funny, if you can encourage somebody else to say something funny, or if you're the type of person who doesn't typically laugh in public amongst your direct reports, now's a good time to do it, because this virus is forcing people to do things that took place 30, 40, 50 years ago, which is a lot of people just sit around, they talked all day. There was very little television, and those that could afford it, it was always black and white. So they didn't watch it that much, or people listened to the radio and had conversations about things like that. So challenge yourselves. You know your customs, you know your rituals. Challenge yourselves to be more positive. Challenge yourselves to be engaging. Challenge yourselves to be encouraging. Challenge yourselves not to be so abrupt. That's another thing that we're picking up globally, is that a lot of people are a lot more tense, and they're being very abrupt. And this is happening in leadership. So if leaders are being abrupt with those that have to report to them, don't you think those people probably don't want to report to people who are going to be a little abrupt? So have some fun. Challenge yourselves in ways that will release positivity, that will encourage people to be their best, that will let people know together we all will get through this. Number 5, you have to allow people to vent when they need to. There are some days where people just need to vent. You know what? Let that person do that. It needs to be respectful. It needs to be in a position that will allow them to feel comfortable, because when people feel uncomfortable, they are uncertain. The uncertainty actually is the cause of fear. So what's really going on is that there is a fearful moment. They were triggered by something that is outside of their control. And so the only way they're going to be able to deal with that immediately is to vent. Doesn't have to be a rant session. Just, hey, you know what? I had a bad night, blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. And you just listen. And when they're all done, look at that person in their eye and say to them quite directly, it's going to be okay. Let them breathe. You don't need to chastise them. You don't need to say this is a waste of my time. You don't even need to allow your face to show that it was a waste of your time, because we all keep saying that our best asset is our employees or our team members. Well, if that's really true, now's the time to actually show that. So let people vent, create a safe space for them to do that, make it be respectful, but have some fun with it. And that's really the end of it. So what I want to show you guys here is the iceberg model. Why is the communication so important? Why is learning how to talk differently during this time so important? Now, we've seen this in various forms, but this is a form from a neuroscience perspective, which means you're looking at the events that happen. That's the first thing that you see. So our optic nerves or our optic network is at play when we're looking at things. Even if we're not in the same room with someone, we're still going to look at the events. From the events, patterns of behavior begin to emerge. Now, over this situation, there are quite a few people that have changed their habit patterns. Where people used to be a lot more funny or jovial, they can't do it as much as they used to because they're used to having people around them. Imagine sports when they actually get back to it, and some of them that have been played so far, they're being played in a very, very empty stadium. And that's got to be a very uncomfortable feeling where there's no one there to cheer them on, to give them that extra energy to move forward. So patterns of behaviors are actually beginning to change. Their system structures of how they actually deal with things, those are actually beginning to change now into what is called a new mental model. So what we just valued 3 months ago has now changed. When you hear someone who's in a position of authority tell you, well, it's probably better that we don't shake hands anymore, well, that's going to be a little difficult because we are designed for touch. It's going to be a little difficult because some of us are huggers. I was raised in a hugging family. Imagine the stress on me when I have to meet someone and I can't hug them. Or if they really, really need to be consoled, I can't put my arms around them or I can't touch them to say it's going to be okay. Or at least that's what the advice is until we come up with some form of antidote. So when you're looking at this, situation, understand that there are going to be patterns of behavior that will change. There are patterns of behavior that must change within you as the team leader, you as the person that people look to for answers. If you're going to design a communication program or process so people can understand what the organizational goals are going to be under this new paradigm, behavior is one of the things that's going to have to be considered. Understanding culture and rituals, those things are going to have to be thought about when you create your new communication structures. Because the mental models that, as I said earlier, that we were just dealing with are going to change. And we're going to have to create new mental models about what we value, about the assumptions about A, B, C, D, and E, and the beliefs that are actually changing as a result of this global pandemic. You again have to be the model of consistency. You again must be the individual or the organization that says, here's how we're going to communicate. And if you're going to put a structure together, the structure really should be looking at something like this. What are the new patterns of behavior we want to see happen? If you're going to have a work at home force that's going to, be at home 30% of the time, what are some of those behaviors that you want to see at home? What are the system structures that need to be in place to make sure that things happen properly? What are the new mental models? What are the new belief structures that we now have to have around work at home force? And are they going to be at home forever? Are we going to have switch offs where one team comes in for the next month and the other team is at home? And are we going to have Zoom meetings? And if we are going to have those Zoom meetings, how long are they going to be? What's the expectation? All of these things now have to come into play. So it is something where we have to make sure that from a communication perspective, that we understand what's happening up here in the brain, because it is the brain that determines what and how we actually do things, whether we like it or not. So be mindful of those things. Oops, go back one. Neuroscience is teaching and has taught us that, and this is from my teacher and mentor, that we have 3 levels of basic conversation. Level 1 is an ask and tell. It's very transactional. When you go to the grocery store or you go get your gas, that is a transaction. You're not really interested in how that person's day is going. You're not really interested in We know what their hopes and dreams are. It's ask and tell. You see someone who you really don't know that you might speak to. Hey, good morning, Don. How are you? Oh, I'm fine. Okay. Okay, well, that's ask and tell. And that is very eye-centric, and it is loaded with potential stress. When you move into level 2, which is going to be positional, now you will advocate and inquire. So we'll go from, hey, Don, how are you doing today? That will then drill down, oh, what did you do exciting today? How did that work? Oh, really? That sounds really interesting. So the listener is really pulling for more information. The speaker is giving more information. And again, they're in a position where there's a great deal of certainty. So they are going to be comfortable. They will be able to talk more. They will be able to engage more. And here's another beautiful word: motivation and productivity. All of these things come when you are able to get a person to talk at level 2. And of course, the final level of this is transformational. Now, I've always spoken from a brain-based perspective that when you actually understand how to connect with another person, they are transformed and so are you. You go beyond the typical, hey, how you doing today? Yeah, I'm fine. How are you? How was your weekend? To you want to see things really rocket into the atmosphere. These are the things that Bill Gates did. These are the things that Steve Jobs did. These are the things that Michael Dell did. These are the things that Apple does every single day. Is they actually live in level 3. They are transforming each other, and by extension, they're also transforming the world. How we look at communication, the types of communication, comes from being transformational. Imagine when Steve Jobs first thought of the iPhone. Imagine that someone said to him, hey, how's that going to work? Oh, okay, I see that. Oh, okay, so we got this, we got that. Okay, I see. Okay, and everyone is getting excited, and all this energy is coming out of everyone. And so it's not just, hey, you know what, Steve Jobs, I understand you want to come up with a new phone technology, something. Okay, tell me about it. There's no excitement in that. And maybe he's not that excited about it, so it only stays in ask and tell. What are you working on? This is what I'm working on. Okay, walks away, nothing. But now if you get them into level 3, you're asking, how is it going to work? Here's a more powerful question. What can I do to help you make it work? Years ago, we used to use a term called servant leadership. And what that was, it was individuals who were leaders who were going down on the front lines and saying, hey, what can I do to help you be better at your job? What can I do to help you further your education? What can I help you to do to go home early or go pick up the kids or help your wife? That's powerful. That's also level 3 because it's transformational, because I'm asking you, what can I do to help you? For those of you who are on the call who are in positions of leadership and you haven't done this before, give it a try. Ask someone, hey, what can I do to help you? You'll be amazed. First of all, they'll be a little intimidated because you've asked the question. And so you may have to ask the question 2 or 3 times. But if you understand this chart, and it's something we will go into later workshops, I'm just introducing it to you now, that we can actually encourage people to be far better than they ever imagined just by understanding how the brain works. If you notice, the color goes from level 1, red, all the way to level 3, which is green. Level 2 is positional, so people are willing to experiment with you a little bit more. So if you're not accustomed to asking people, hey, how's your day? Tell me about your weekend. Hey, I heard your kid played soccer. How'd the game go? If they're not used to that and you start to do that, powerful things will happen. It'll take 2 or 3 times for them to be able to trust you, because the whole process is about helping you earn their trust so that you can then get the best out of them. So we want to move people into level 2 and then ultimately level 3. So these are the things that we will be talking about as we move forward in our workshops. All throughout the previous workshops, we've talked about conversation, but there's a chemical conversation because, as you see, that we have neurochemicals that flow through our brains all the time. And when you talk to someone, depending upon how you talk with them, you're either going to release arousal and stress hormones, which is your noradrenaline, adrenaline, and cortisol, or you're going to release the happy cocktails, which is oxytocin, dopamine, endorphin, serotonin, and GABA. If you are a wise person, that I believe that all of us are, you will begin to understand when I speak to other people, I'm either going to be inducing cortisol or I'm going to be inducing oxytocin. And what you want to be inducing is oxytocin because you want that person to bond with you, even if it's for a purpose. Have them bond with you so that real trust can begin to develop. And once there is a real sense of trust, that's when you can see level 3. You'll see level 2 conversations move right into level 3 if you're paying attention to the green side. And this is really, really powerful. And again, we'll go into this a little bit deeper later. When we are spoken to in an uncomfortable manner, when you talk to someone in an uncomfortable manner, when someone talks to you in an uncomfortable manner, you wind up going up what is called the ladder of conclusion. The ladder of conclusion starts with conversations, bioreactions, feelings, thoughts, beliefs, and then the conclusion. And we have been able to scientifically understand why people are triggered. And this is the very reason why people actually are triggered, is because everything starts with a conversation. Imagine if when you wake up next to your wife or your husband and they just grunt at you. Ugh. Now, you're not going to be very excited with the grunt because we're no longer cavemen and cavewomen. But imagine if someone that you share a bed with gets up and says, "Hey, good morning, darling. How are you this morning?" "Oh, yeah, I'm okay. Yeah, I slept well." Or, "No, I didn't. My sleep was a little disturbed. I don't know what was happening. I wasn't really feeling all good." People actually did talk like that. And then we got away from it. And something happened because we got away from it. And I'm not really sure what it was. But the upshot of it is that we are not as friendly as we used to, even to the people we're actually married to. Marriages have taken on this form of, it's a thing I have to do, as opposed to it is a thing I get to do. And more importantly, I'm actually pretty happy. So imagine that the conversation doesn't go so well. So now you got the bioreactions happening. So that means your gut is releasing and feeling all this cortisol. Your brain is not feeling very good because you've got all this negative stuff running around in your brain. Your feelings then begin to come into it. "Oh, well, I'm feeling bad," or "this person doesn't make me feel good." And now what you believe about a person, place, or thing really takes hold. And then you lead to your own conclusion. The worst and the best example I can tell you how this works, imagine being in a meeting 3 months ago. You're part of the team, but everybody else on the team gets called into the meeting except for you. Talk about the feeling of isolation. Talk about the feeling of, I wonder what's really going on. Oh, okay, they must be talking about me. I must have done something wrong. I found myself this past weekend doing that myself. My neighbors invited me over for dinner. I went over for dinner and one of them said, "Hey, Don, I have to ask you an embarrassing question." And she didn't say it curiously. She kind of said it kind of seriously. And I went, "Oh my gosh, what did I do wrong?" And that's the first thing I said. "Well, what did I do wrong?" Now, I went right up my ladder of conclusion just based on the simple fact that not more than 30 seconds ago, she said to me, "Hey, I got to ask you an embarrassing question." And the question simply was very benign. It really didn't have anything to do with why I was there. It didn't change whether or not I would go back. But I ran up my ladder of conclusion just because the way they said it. So even I, who understands and studies this stuff, I have a problem with it. So it is something that as human beings that we must be able to get to a point where we understand the conversation, how we lead the conversation, how we start the conversation. Are we smiling? Even if it's, you got to be serious, there is a serious way of getting things done. My mother, I don't recall her ever once raising her voice at me. She just gave me a look. And that look said I've crossed the line. And if she had to give me the double look, that meant when I got home, if we were out, I was going to get a spanking. Not just by her, but also by my dad if he wasn't already there. So we've got to get to a point where we can get back to understanding how people are affected and motivated just by the way that we actually speak to them. So we have to understand how the brain works. So even us in leadership, this is becoming very, very prevalent. The move has been going on since 1982. That's when it began. Understanding how the brain works and understanding what we can do to help people be their best. Then we get into what are called listening benchmarks. As a leader, we have to also learn how to listen. We don't want people to always be in protect mode. We want them actually to be in partnership mode. Now, I'm not going to go through all of this because I do want to leave a fair bit of time for debrief and a fair bit of time for Q&A. So I'll just go down the left-hand side. So where we have the condition when we're talking with someone, the limbic network or the emotional center of the brain is always going to be in play. It's either going to be fearful, vulnerable, compassionate, or passionate. Those are the typical 4 states that we have to deal with. How you listen to a person. Do you pretend to listen? Do you try to listen? Does that person who's being a difficult person on the team, do they fit the first 2 pretend and tries? Do they listen without being judgmental? A lot of times you hear information and you're very judgmental with your response. You can see it in your eyes. Your facial expressions will give away what's really going on. Or are you really observant and you show that there's an interest and you want more of what they're actually saying so that you can get them into partnership. You can keep them into partnership. You can keep them in that co-creative state. What are the effects going to be on your coworkers? What are the effects going to be on your customers? If the person is in protect mode, they're going to alienate team members. If they have anything to do with customers, they're definitely going to alienate the customers. If you remember back to the very first session, those of you that were there, we talked about how the brain creates a concept of self. Well, we can even take how the brain creates a concept of self of a person, place, or thing. So if you're in the service industry and people are not happy with you, maybe you want to understand how that individual or how your sales team or how your product or how your service has created a concept of itself based on bad performance or not up to par performance. Relationship to company goals. Does your team understand, excuse me, that there's a relationship that they have to have and develop with the company goals? Are they going to be defensive? Are they going to align themselves with that? Are there going to be contributions with that? Or are they actually going to engage other people to say, hey, what can I do to help the organization? What can I do to help the team? And performance. So what is the effect of that person's performance if they're always in protect mode? If they're not going to move into partnership, that's always going to be a problem. Always going to be a problem. So we want to move people from the protect mode in our conversations, and we want to move them into getting engaged with what the team is all about. A lot of people do the job or they do the task that's assigned to them, but do they have real relationship with people on their teams? Do they really understand that, wow, they got a little boy and that little boy is turning 5 years old and that's very exciting? Do they ask those questions that would lead them to believe it's not just about task? In neuroscience, social neuroscience particularly, we call it task above relationships. If you're so task focused that you forget about the relationship, then that person only sees you as a person who's just going to ask them about the task. You're not ever going to engage them about their personality or their personhood or whatever happened the week before or anything like that. And that can always become a problem. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to stop it here because I do want to have time for Q&A. So I want to turn it back over to Vikas and Rajiv, and let's see if we can take some questions.
Yes, thank you, Don. I think we had people saying this is very interesting. So this is for everyone. We would want to open this for questions. Anyone who wants to ask any question, you could either write it in the chat box, and I will be happy to put it across to Don, or you can unmute yourself and directly ask a question to him. Another thing, if you feel free, feel free to open your cameras as well. Let's have a more inclusive thing where we're seeing each other as well. So over to you, attendees, whoever wants to ask the question.
Hi, this is Gagandeep.
Hello.
Yeah, Gagan, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm working as an assistant manager HR with Merino, and I have to speak to multiple strangers on a daily basis for recruitment purposes onto our projects. Right, and whenever I speak to them, the only thing they come up with is related to Corona. Right. You asked earlier in your presentation that we can be curious, we can ask them questions. Later on you said that we can listen to them, right? But as I am from India, the people which I'm trying to talk, they are mostly from other states in India or they are from US. So given that, it's a bit unlikely for me to build rapport, especially when all that talk about is Corona and how is it impacting their jobs and what jobs they want or something like that. So everything revolves around the same situation. So how can I tackle that?
Good question. One of the things that would probably be helpful, particularly when you're dealing with Americans, we're a delightful bunch. And while someone may be calling you up asking about a job or what's going on, with a potential job, one of the things I think that you can do, particularly if you're doing a Zoom meeting or Skype or whatever platform you may be using, is to actually ask them about their day. It's out of left field, I know, but it removes the brain from thinking too seriously. Hey, how was your day? So before you get into it, for example, I have a a person that does some work for me, and whenever I call her, she just jumps right into it, and I have to stop her and say, "Hey, remember we agreed that we're going to check on each other to see how each other is actually going." Asking them about their day before they actually get into it, or if you read on their CV or their resume that they have an unusual activity interest. Like for me, I fly drones. Now, on one level, before 3 months ago, it was actually pretty cool to fly a drone. And I actually have a license to fly a drone. But now it's not so cool because police are using drones for other things. So if you can find something that's engaging about what they do that then have a conversation about that. And even if you don't talk about it, write maybe a little note. I got a note from someone a week ago that said, "Hey, thank you for taking the time to talk to my mom. It meant a lot to her and to me." Now, I never spoke to the daughter, I just spoke to the mom. But I got the email from the daughter and the daughter said, my mom said that you are an American, and we've only hear Americans on television. We would be interested if we could talk to you again because we'd like to ask you some questions about being American. As far as if you're talking to other Indians in your conversational rituals, and that's a term that you should become familiar with, your conversational rituals are set pretty much before you're actually born. This is what we call the epigenetics of conversation. And you have to be willing to break down your own conversational rituals to redevelop them so that you can connect with people more and you can connect where they are. So if you know you're dealing with someone from your own country or someone outside of your country, you should have two sets of rituals because you know what the rituals are in your country. You don't necessarily know what the rituals are in another country, but if you find out something that's interesting about that person, what state they come from, what it is that they do, we ask the same questions over and over and over again. Flip the script just a little bit. Maybe tell them something about yourself. I jokingly tell people I'm going to have a meeting in about 6 hours with a team in North America, and they know me being funny. They know I can also be very serious, but they know me being funny because one day I brought out a glass of margarita at 6 a.m. in the morning. And I said, this is how I deal with my stress. Now the glass was empty and I had to go back and explain I don't have drinks at 6 a.m. in the morning, but they got the point. And so now every time we get together, they expect to see a glass, an empty glass, margarita glass in front of me because that's kind of my moniker. So you can find ways and things to do to break the ice. If you actually take the time to write me down specifically what you're talking about, I will respond to you a little bit more specifically. But thank you for the question. Next question.
Sorry, can I just add to that answer? Something that works for my clients is asking what's going well in someone's day or what made you laugh today. Just something simple like that.
That's a good one. Yep. Thanks for that, Iris.
All right, I guess that can help us steer the conversation away from the corona topic as well, right?
Yes.
So, yeah, thank you, Don. Ashok, would you want to directly ask your question to Don?
Yes, okay. So, Don, I hear that on one side, on a listening style mode, you have the protect at one end and the partnership on the other.
Yes.
I find myself oscillating between the various styles in any one given conversation. That could be due to the nature of the conversation, my predisposition about being judgmental, and a number of other things. Maybe a certain portion of the conversation could be boring, so I'm not observant, and so on. So, is it really possible to benchmark when the style itself is oscillating and wavering? I thought it's a very normal thing for us to, we may not be fully focused in a conversation. It could be oscillating, so it's just perfectly normal.
So it is normal because that's what we've come to let happen. And by let happen, I'm saying, so, you could be listening to someone, and as you said, the conversation is pretty boring, and you will zone out. But you also have to look at you at the time that you think the conversation is actually boring because it's boring to you, that may not be boring to the other person. So next time it happens, I would encourage you to make a mental note of where you are mentally and emotionally at the time this conversation began and what made the conversation boring for you. Now, if the person themselves is boring, I get that because sometimes people are boring. How do you go from the protect mode into the partnership mode? For me, it's actually pretty easy because even if the conversation is boring, I find something to hold on to within that boring part of the conversation, or after they got through the boring part, they actually told me what they wanted, and then I can focus on that. But I have to be willing to listen. I have to be willing not to go up to my letter of conclusion by thinking I know what they want, because that's actually a brain thing. When we get bored of hearing something from someone, we automatically think, because the brain will try to fill in the gap as to what is really going on and what they're really trying to say. So I would encourage you to focus on the end game. What do they really need from me? Try having something positive to say to them, even through that boring session, because sometimes when it gets boring, you can say, and these words are very powerful. By the way, if a person talks so much and it's boring, say, by the way, and literally they'll just, something happens in the brain, it just literally shuts down. And then you can ask a question through that boring period. Say, I heard you say this, but I'm suspecting that maybe there's something else beyond that. So you take back control of the conversation so that you help them get to what they need, and you're not so bored in the process. It is a skill, and it is something that will take a little time to develop, but you can do it. We all do it. I mean, trust me, I've had people tell me I'm a very boring speaker. I had that happen as early as 6 months ago. Someone says, you know what, you're a pretty boring person. And I went, oh. And I actually got the facial expressions and the whole 9 yards. And I said, well, hang on. Well, help me understand that. You just can't drop that bomb on me. What is it about me that's boring? And when they begin to think about it, and we're talking about two different cultures, they said, oh, okay, I know what it is. Culturally, this is what Americans do, and this is what we do. So to them, my speech pattern and my speech style was slow because they didn't understand that I actually slowed down to make sure all the information came out. And in their conversational rituals, it's brrr, and people kind of sort of understand what the other person meant, but that's where there's a lot of problems, and that's why I was actually called in to have a conversation with them. This was with a organization that makes these things, makes these backup tapes, a company called Seagate. And they were I was out talking with them, helping them understand people have created a concept of Seagate and their products, and that's why they lost market share. And they began to understand what I was trying to say, but the area manager said I was very boring. But what he figured out after we had a conversation, because I wasn't intimidated by him saying that I was boring, and he said it in front of 25 people, and I was not intimidated that he said it, but after we got through it, he understood that he made a mistake in saying that I was boring because he didn't understand the North American conversational ritual. And by the end, we were all laughing almost on the floor. But it also helped that I played a little bit of James Brown music to make him laugh a little bit. So those are some things that you can do. If you're really bored, if you find a person really boring and you're vacillating between, how I listen, what the condition is, blah, blah, yada, 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 think of something that is interesting about that person, or just cut them off by saying, by the way, and then you fill in the gap.
Thank you, Don.
Next,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Next
Don,
question.
sorry, everyone. Because Don, there's a time check. We got 2 minutes left. Vikas, you're on mute, Vikas.
Sorry for this. So Iris, I wanted to tell you, Nalina is complimenting you for a very good coaching interview.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I was just answering Debbie's question to her. So.
Okay. And Prakash, would you want to ask your question to Don directly? Or would you want me to read it out? Okay, so it's a longish question, Don. In case Prakash is not there, maybe I'll move to another question. Alka, are you there? Do you want to ask the question directly to Don?
Yeah, hi.
Yeah.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for this this wonderful session. It was a lot of information, and thank you for the interaction before that. Quickly, I just want to know, trust is going to be a very important component when we talk about business, when we talk about relationships, both at the workplace as well as, you know, for a lot of businesses who have to reinvent relationships today. What should we keep in mind as far as trust is concerned?
What should we what?
Keep in mind. What should we focus?
Trust is chemical, meaning that trust lives in the brain. Trust is not what you and I may have grown up with. You know, someone is trustworthy. That's something different. If we remember to release as much oxytocin into the environment, and we can do that with a smile, we can do that with a handshake, we can do that by looking at the mirror neurons. We can release a lot of trust. If you were on one of the previous sessions, I pulled up a document that was trust, and it spelled out different words. So the first T was transparency, but with transparency, because we've heard that word a lot for the past 25 years, what is the intent of my transparency and what is the impact? The R was for relationship. What is my intent with this relationship and what is my impact with that relationship? The U was for understanding. What is my impact of understanding this person? I mean, my intent in understanding this person, and what is my impact in understanding this person? The S was for shared success. Do I talk about what shared success looks like? What is the impact of my explaining shared success? I mean, what is the intent and what is the impact? And the last T was for truth telling, not telling the truth, because we all tell the truth. It's just our version of it. But if we truth tell, which is different, because now that means we both are going to be looking at the same event with pretty much similar outcomes, because I started with the very first T with intent and impact. And if I truth tell, what is the impact? What is the intent of saying that and doing that and demonstrating that? And what is the impact going to be? Each letter has intent and impact. As we move further into the year and things begin to change, and we're going to have to redevelop and redefine, trust has more currency today than literally it did just 2 weeks ago. And if we can come into a point of understanding that trust is chemical, and I don't care if you give me a great job, I don't care if you pay me the most amount of money, none of that will matter because I'm placing task above relationship again. But if I understand trust is chemical, if I understand the more oxytocin that I release, and it takes less than 3 seconds to release oxytocin, and it takes less than 1 second to release cortisol. So whether you're in a position of authority over me or not, if you're releasing too much cortisol, I'm not going to like you very much. But if you are in a position of authority over me and you're going to help me advance and you demonstrate trust as I just explained it, now you have a person who will walk through a brick wall for you. You want to see children change? You want to see your husband change? You want to see your father change? Iris can tell you true stories of people that she's coaching right now today. That's people have changed because they understand what trust is. People change because they understand how the brain creates a concept of self. People are changing because they understand the 4 reciprocal psychological needs. So from your perspective as a leader, you too are going to have to understand how the brain operates. That is going to be the #1 focus. And again, it has been for the past 15 years that leadership globally is being moved into brain-based sciences, brain-based education, brain-based development, so that they understand how their employees are being affected by those decisions that they have to make. And trust is a big one. And when I describe trust to a bank that I used to work for, they were blown away because I said, okay, everyone tell me the definition of trust. And so I had 50 different sheets of paper, and maybe about 10% were similar or the same. But now when I wrote to the board and wrote trust and wrote all the letters and put intent and impact, I had everyone's attention. And they're still doing it to this very day. They always talk about the intent of doing something and what's going to be the impact.
This was
Thank you,
really
Don.
helpful.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Thank you, Don. I think we are 5 minutes over time. Prakash, I'm sorry, we will not be able to ask your question right now. I think Prakash was having some speaker problems, so he couldn't ask it himself. Don, I'll send you his question, and we will try and send him back the answer.
Okay, I will most definitely do that. And for the rest of you, please, if you have questions, write them down. I will answer all those questions and I will send them back to them. We will have one more session because Iris and Rajiv, we're going to talk tomorrow and we'll have a date. So sometime later this week or first of next week, you'll get the final session and the sessions that we're planning on doing afterwards, and we'll go from there. So with that, thank you, and I'm going to turn it back over to Rajiv.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Don. Thanks for a lovely session. Thank you, Iris, for that nice coaching session, and thank you, Rajiv, also for being a very supportive coachee. I would also want to thank all of our attendees. We are obviously over time, so a lot of them have left already. Don't want to take too much time. We will come back with the next session pretty soon. The information will be sent to you probably by the next week. We look forward to having you with us next time as well. Thank you so much, and all the best.
Everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.